The disappearance of Brian Randall Shaffer has been one of the most baffling missing persons cases I've come across personally. I've often said that if I were to die and get accepted into heaven, and God would have a giant book with all the answers to every single unsolved mystery at the ready, Brian Shaffer would be among the first cases I'd ask for, right behind what happened to MH370, of course. If you're not familiar with the disappearance of Brian Shaffer, I covered it in episodes 16 and 17 with my good friend Elaine. That's more of an in-depth look at Brian's case. I'll give you a brief summary of the case here, but if you're interested in diving deeper, I encourage you to go listen to episodes 16 and 17. Today I'm here to talk about a very specific aspect of this case that I believe deserves way more attention: the phone ping in Hilliard, Ohio. This is a 1 minute and 43 seconds YouTube exclusive episode. Today, I want to revisit the disappearance of Brian Shaffer, but with a specific focus, a detail in the case that I've always found to be incredibly intriguing. First, if you're unfamiliar, here's a quick summary of the case. Brian Shaffer was a medical student at Ohio State University in 2006, and Brian disappeared after a night out celebrating the start of spring break with a few of his friends. Brian was one of two sons to Randy and Renee Shaffer, and he grew up in Pickerington, Ohio. Brian had been through a lot that year so far, as his mother had died 3 weeks prior to a rare form of cancer. He was also pulling all-nighters studying for his exams. So, the night out on Friday, March 31st, 2006, seemed to be a much-needed break for Brian. Another important thing to mention to set the context in this case is that Brian had a long-term girlfriend at the time, Alexis Wagner, who was away visiting family on this particular weekend. The pair was due to depart for Miami on that Monday for a spring break trip together. As I mentioned earlier, we did a deep dive into this case in episodes 16 and 17, so if you're unfamiliar with the case and need further context, pause this, go back to those episodes, and familiarize yourself with it. Now, Brian disappeared around closing time at the bar he was visiting with a couple of his friends called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. After checking the bathrooms at the establishment and not being able to get a hold of Brian via phone, the friends he was with assumed Brian had gone home and left themselves. One of the most baffling details in this case is the fact that upon review of surveillance cameras, investigators were able to account for and identify every person who entered and exited the bar, except for Brian. This had led to speculation that perhaps Brian never left the bar. I personally don't believe this theory. I think Brian was able to evade cameras somehow, likely by happenstance that night, and whatever happened to him that night happened outside of the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Now, no one could get a hold of Brian that weekend, but the real alarms weren't raised until Brian was a no-show at the airport, when he was due to meet Alexis for their upcoming trip to Miami. Since the night he vanished from the bar, not a trace of Brian Shaffer has been found. And this leads me to the specific part of this case I want to discuss. After Brian vanished that night, his girlfriend Alexis started a new routine. She would call Brian's cell phone every night before she went to bed. Now, ever since the night he disappeared, the phone would go straight to voicemail, indicating that the phone was either off or dead. Still, Alexis would call the phone, and each time, it would go straight to voicemail. But one night, in September 2006, about 6 months after Brian disappeared, Alexis got the shock of her life when the phone rang. She wrote about this experience on her MySpace page at the time. She says, quote, "I kept calling it to hear it purely because it was one of the best sounds I have ever heard, even if no one picked up." End quote. Now, Brian's wireless provider at the time was Singular, and they went on to say that it was possible the ringing that Alexis heard was nothing more than a computer glitch. But investigators were able to trace a ping to the phone. The ping was detected at a cell tower in Hilliard, Ohio, 14 miles or 23 kilometers northwest of Columbus. I've been intrigued by this case for a very long time, and at the time I heard that detail, I didn't really know a lot about phone pings and how they worked. Still, this small detail has always intrigued me, and while it gets mentioned most of the time when this case gets covered, I always thought it needed more focus. And while I could be completely wrong, I can't help but think this phone ping might be the key to this case. I decided to explore it further. As a reminder, the last time that Brian was seen on CCTV was at 1:55 a.m., right outside the bar. But, and if you're familiar with this case, you'll know this, the Ugly Tuna Saloona was located in a plaza, and so being outside the bar didn't necessarily mean you were outside. It was more like you were in the entrance that led to an escalator that would leave the building. Now, when Brian is spotted on surveillance at 1:55 a.m., he's seen with two women that he's speaking to. These women were both identified as Amber and Brighton. I believe that one of these women was in a class that Brian's friend Clint had been a TA for. But the woman I want to focus on is Brighton, and we can get into her interactions with Brian later on. But first, I wanted to refer to an interview conducted by Kelly Bruce, or host of the Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive podcast. This is an interview with Brighton, and it's absolutely fantastic. Brighton was actually an employee at a Verizon Wireless for about 7.5 years. She was involved in doing technical support there. She told Kelly Bruce on the Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive podcast, quote, "The only way a phone can communicate with a network and ring is if it's powered on and it will connect." Brighton went on to say that the phone was ringing for multiple hours, according to everyone in Brian's family that was trying to call him. She said, "No way that's a glitch. The phone was on." So the question remains, who was in possession of Brian's phone in September of 2006, and why did it ping in Hilliard, a city northwest of Columbus? Hearing Brighton share her opinion on these phone pings based on her experience got me even more interested in this aspect of the case. I started thinking about reasons and methods in which Brian himself could have ended up in or near Hilliard that night. The night of his disappearance, that is. Hilliard, Ohio is technically classified as a suburb of Columbus and is part of Norwich Township. As of the census in 2020, Hilliard had a population of just over 37,000. Brian grew up in Pickerington, Ohio, which is worth noting is southeast from Columbus, the opposite direction of Hilliard. What connections did Brian have, if any, to Hilliard? I decided to explore this whole phone ping thing on Reddit. I wanted to hear the thoughts of other mystery lovers when it came to this detail, so I made some posts about it. And sure enough, someone made a comment that absolutely intrigued me even more. The comment came from Reddit user Velvta, who writes, "eCycle is a mobile phone recycling company based in Hilliard that started in 2005. I posted this on Web Sleuths a year ago, maybe. His phone may have ended up there, and firing the phone back up might be part of the recycling processes." Very interesting. A mobile phone recycling company based in Hilliard and started in 2005, a year before Brian vanished. According to their website, eCycle Incorporated is a premier mobile device recycling company that partners with leading corporations and large government agencies to securely recycle their smartphones. Now, is it possible the phone ping in Hilliard is completely unrelated to this eCycle place? Absolutely. But I still thought it was an incredibly fascinating detail. I continued to read about the eCycle process on the company's website. I won't pretend to be an expert on companies like eCycle, but it's intriguing to me that this company exists in a town that Brian's phone pinged in. As I dug deeper, I discovered more captivating information about Brian's cell phone pings. This came via an interview with Sergeant John Hurst, now retired, but the lead investigator in Brian's disappearance. This was also an interview conducted by Kelly Bruce of the Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive podcast. Sergeant Hurst shared the initial steps that were taken to locate Brian after the night he vanished. The first step was to check homeless shelters and hospitals, but when they found no evidence of Brian, they dug deeper. They went back to the Ugly Tuna Saloona and reviewed security footage. They also searched parts of the Olentangy River, which runs through Columbus. Sergeant Hurst calls the resources used at that time, quote, astronomical. He also seemed to quell rumors that Brian was somehow concealed within the construction that was going on at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. He stated that while it was somewhat rough terrain back there, it wasn't a place where a person could be easily hidden. He indicates that there were ways Brian could have easily gotten out of the building without being detected, which leads me to my conclusion that I also don't believe Brian's somewhere in the building. Now, in addition to exploring all these avenues, another thing that the police did was take a look at the phone company. And Sergeant Hurst revealed some information that was previously unknown, that there was actually a phone ping the night of Brian's disappearance on the west side of Columbus, down near Kenny Road and Lane Avenue. Maybe this is something that some people already knew, but it was new information to me. Some have even speculated that this information could have been previously withheld to protect the integrity of the investigation. Still, as anyone intrigued by this case will attest, or anyone intrigued by baffling mysteries like this, a new piece of information is like gold. In looking at a map of directions from where the Ugly Tuna Saloona was located in 2006, 1546 North High Street, to West Lane Avenue and Kenny Road, it would be a bit over 2 miles. Interestingly, Brian lived at 208 King Avenue, which, depending on the route you would take, was on the way to the area of the phone ping. Now, please take everything I'm laying out here with a grain of salt. Phone pings were not the same in 2006 as they are today. Sergeant Hurst himself says at the time cell phone ping information would give much wider ranges and could be as far as 20 miles away, with the goal to triangulate the ping between towers. Another intriguing fact is that Kenny Road and West Lane Avenue was in the direction of Hilliard from the Ugly Tuna Saloona, where Brian's phone pinged in September of 2006 when Alexis called it, 6 months after his disappearance. So let's dive deeper into the Hilliard phone ping. According to Sergeant John Hurst, the general area of this ping was near Scioto Darby Creek Road and the West Belt in Hilliard. This is another piece of information I was previously unaware of until I dove into it further. Hurst already stated a field was searched off of that road, but nothing was found. Let's go back to the night of Brian's disappearance. When Brian was last spotted on CCTV outside the Ugly Tuna Saloona speaking with 2 women. If you recall, Brighton was one of these women, the woman who had previously worked at Verizon and gave an interview with Kelly Bruce. Brian was allegedly flirting with Brighton quite a lot, going as far to kiss her neck and exchange phone numbers with her. She confirmed that she typed her number into Brian's phone herself. That's very interesting, and not just because Brian was already in a relationship. No, it gets much more intriguing. Brighton stated that Brian was planning on walking the 2 women to their car after the bar closed, which she says never happened, obviously, because Brian was nowhere to be seen. However, neither of the women can remember why Brian didn't walk them to the car. The grainy surveillance footage of Brian with the 2 women outside the bar that night has been analyzed extensively by both law enforcement and the public. Some who have studied the video stated that it looks like Brian placed his cell phone into Brighton's purse. I've seen the footage, and while I can see the movements people are referring to, honestly, I can't say that I definitively believe it. While it's certainly possible, the footage is simply too fuzzy to tell. He could have just as easily put his phone back into his pocket. One other piece of information about the night of the disappearance worth mentioning is that Brian and his friend Clint were seen arguing, although the bar was too loud for the witness to hear what was being said. What we do know is that sometime over the next several minutes, Brian would vanish. As I continued to dig deeper, I came across a comment that at the time, Brighton was associated with an address in Hilliard, Ohio. I did some research into this and did find some evidence that Brighton had once resided in Hilliard, but I wasn't able to verify this 100%. Now, this is not to say I believe that Brighton is any way involved in Brian's disappearance. Under no circumstances do I encourage anyone to dox or to reach out to Brighton at all. She's given interviews publicly, so for any interested, I'll link to those in the description of the episode. I only bring this up because this is once again another potential connection to Hilliard. And there would be another potential connection to Hilliard that I would discover. For those familiar with the case, you'll remember the comment on Brian's dad's obituary. In September of 2008, 2.5 years after Brian disappeared, his father, Randy Shaffer, who had been unyielding in the search for his son, was tragically killed in a freak accident during a heavy windstorm. Randy was clearing debris in his yard when a branch flew off from a nearby tree, fatally injuring him in the process. Randy's obituary was posted online and received a flood of comments from family, friends, and even strangers who were moved by Randy's efforts to find Brian. Then there was this comment, quote, "I miss you, Dad. Love, Brian. U.S. Virgin Islands." Obviously, this comment attracted a great deal of attention, but it was later determined to be a hoax. So why are we talking about it? According to an interview with Sergeant Hurst, he stated the comment was made from a public computer in Franklin County. Now guess what's in Franklin County? Hilliard. Now, I understand that Franklin County encompasses a great deal more than that, including Columbus, the most populous city in Ohio. This could have easily just been an internet troll who found some sick pleasure and was messing with the family plagued by tragedy. But I found another curious comment on Reddit that, if true, would be pretty wild. As you can see, the following post is from a now deleted account. The part that intrigued me the most was, quote, "Interestingly, the public library where the hoax post on Randy Shaffer's obituary webpage came from is right around the corner from the e-cycle address. Hard for me to believe that that's just a coincidence." Now, we obviously have to take this comment with several large grains of salt. Had this user's account not been deleted, I would have reached out myself to see if I could find out where the person got this information. I've tried relentlessly to find any record of where this public computer was located, and I can't find anything beyond Franklin County. This article from 10tv.com states, quote, "According to police, the internet message did not originate from a computer in the U.S. Virgin Islands, but rather from a public access computer located in Franklin County." So, where in Franklin County did this comment originate? There is one public library about a mile away from e-cycle in Hilliard. Hardly right around the corner, as the Reddit commenter says, but not that far either. This person could either be making things up to spark discussion, or it may be true. So let's review. Brian's phone pings in Hilliard, Ohio in September of 2006, nearly 6 months after he disappeared from the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Subsequently, a field off Scioto Darby Creek Road in Hilliard was searched, but nothing substantial was found. Hilliard is home to e-cycle, a mobile device recycling company. And the comment on Randy Shaffer's obituary was made from a public computer in Franklin County, potentially one close to the e-cycle address, but not definitely. On top of it all, one of the women Brian was flirting with on the night of his disappearance at one time potentially lived in or around the Hilliard area. All of these things could be explained away separately. Phone pings weren't as accurate back then as they are today. E-cycle, while an intriguing clue, could be completely unrelated to this case. And the comment on the obituary could have just been another bored person looking to stir up some drama. But all of these strange puzzle pieces put together are very intriguing at the least, and, more so, potentially the key to this case. So what do you think of this information? The phone pings, both in Hilliard and on the west side of Columbus. The flirting with Brighton and the exchanging of phone numbers. The comment on the public computer, and the mobile tech recycling company known as eCycle. Is there something to it all? I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on this. Alexis Wagner, Brian's girlfriend at the time he went missing, has gone on to become a doctor. She has since married and had 2 sons. Since the death of Brian's mother before his disappearance and the death of his father after, Brian's brother Derek remains the only immediate member of the Shaffer family. What happened to Brian Shaffer in the early hours of April 1st, 2006? And what does it have to do, if anything, with Hilliard, Ohio? Is it all just noise, or is there something more to the story? I'll let you decide.